Hello, everyone. I'm CJ Laguerre with Lean Startup Company, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the webcast. Today's topic is lean publishing, and moderating the discussion is our own Lean Startup Company faculty member, Hisham Ibrahim. Our guest is co-founder and CEO of Leanpub, Peter Armstrong. And with that, I'll hand things off to Hisham.
Thank you, CJ. And Peter, thank you for joining us today on this webcast.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we jump right in but kind of start broad to set context. Can you describe to us what the publishing landscape looks like today and what trends you see happening that are going to define what it looks like in 5 to 7 years?
Sure. And so I'm biased, obviously, since I'm CEO of an ebook company. But for me right now, it's literally the biggest opportunity in the history of the book. Like, books can go from having commoditized margins, right, with returns, shipping, physical stores, to having software margins with no marginal cost, millions of customers with computers, billions with phones. So there's enormous opportunity, but it's really clouded and murky because it's unclear about how the industry will get there, will it get there? And ironically, many publishers have fought this tooth and nail. Like, fought ebooks, that you see gleeful articles in the media. Ebooks have stagnated. Ebooks are dying. Amazon's opening physical stores. We can print books and smell them again. Like, there's this sort of clinging to the cost structure, essentially, and it's almost fetishization of the book, like this physical object. I mean, I love physical books, like everybody does, but it's really like this sort of, there's lots of like uncertainty about how we're going to get from the model of like the big five producing books, the sort of industrial revolution model of books, to like where we are now, where we're going, where anyone can make a book. There's no barriers to entry. There's no gatekeepers. The tools are getting better. They're getting more lean. So there's lots of disruption. And then there's confusion because people talk about, oh, ebooks are stagnating or ebooks are dying, whatever. But the interesting thing is, as you guys are obviously lean startup people, measurement affects how you think about things. And lots of what's happening is things aren't easy to measure anymore. Like, it used to be everything had an ISBN. Leanpub we never use ISBNs in any of our books. So we have millions of dollars in royalties paid out to authors. None of this has ever been captured in any data anyone's using anywhere. And so one of my co-founders, Leanpub, likes to talk about this, and he called it, in a TechCrunch article a few years ago, the dark matter of the publishing industry. Like, there's all this activity going on that isn't being talked about, isn't being written about, isn't mainstream, is at the fringes, but obviously, as you guys know, that's usually where the innovation comes from. And so there's disruption, there's confusion, right? And in startup land, we love disruption. I mean, we have conferences called Disrupt. But in publishing, most of the people involved seem to be really fearful of disruption and really not wanting anything to change. So in terms of what will the world look like in a number of years? So if you ask the big five, it'll be like just the same as it is now, except Amazon will have some little 7-Elevens that are automated. You can go in and take the physical book out and walk out, and there you go. If you ask Apple and Google and Amazon what will it look like, they'll say, well, we make 30% of all the ebook money, and it's fantastic, right? Because of controlling the mobile platforms where purchasing is done. In terms of overall where the publishing industry is going, I see there's a lot of, like, a few years ago, you had a lot of experiments of people making books as apps, kind of, and that sort of, we were never really excited about any of that in Leanpub because we think books should be books. But where we do see a lot of the crossover is between books and courses. And so a lot of, hey, we should make a book more dynamic, is really, oh, this book is actually more like a course than a book. And so we see sort of courses as being the next, in many ways, for many types of book, the next level of a book is a course. And so we see books and courses as being this really interesting thing.
Great. So it sounds like there's lowering of barriers, a lot of indicators of disruption going on, but the traditional pushback from legacy players and infrastructure. Excellent. Now let's talk about lean startup to publications. So there's a general misconception out there that lean startup is all about technology and building products in the technology world. Why would you say that applying lean startup is a good fit for publication?
Sure. And so, I mean, I love this because, I mean, we're called Leanpub. Like we called ourselves Leanpub based on the idea of lean publishing. And for me, I had a epiphany 8 years ago now that a book is a startup. And so if you think about, well, why is lean startup good for publishing? Well, first of all, you have to think, well, I mean, are these what startups and books, like, are these things related or not? And I mean, a book is a bunch of words in order. A startup is a company with people in it. So you think, well, no, they're totally different. But if you think about more deeply, Eric Ries's definition of a startup is, a human institution designed to deliver a new product or service under condition of extreme uncertainty, right? Think about that related to books, right? So there's 4 parallels that I wrote about in 2010, right? Risk, creativity, stealth, and funding. So like with risk, you have like market risk, technical risk, like low probability of success. Creative, like books and startups are very creative processes, right? Undertaken by a few people or one person or a few people, typically with startups, or one person typically with books, working together. And stealth, historically, startups were done in stealth mode, books were done in stealth mode, right? You have the author in the ivory tower, you have the startup people like not getting out of the building, right? And then funding, you have publishers giving out advances, which are just loans which never get repaid, to authors, or else you have VCs handing out money or angels handing out money to startup people. So the parallels between books and startups, there are very direct parallels. And there's another one which I didn't go into back in 2010 that I also like, which is that startup founders have been really scared of people stealing their ideas, and authors have been very scared about people stealing their ideas, right? So there's all these parallels between books and startups. And so you think, well, why would lean startup apply to publishing? It's like, well, I mean, think about lean startup, right? So for me, what we do with lean publishing is I define lean publishing as the act of publishing an in-progress book using lightweight tools and many iterations to get reader feedback, pivot until you have the right book, and build traction once you do. And so if you think about iterating, pivoting, getting feedback, right? That's lean startup, right? Get out of the building in terms of Steve Blank terminology, talk to customers, get feedback, right? Figure out, are you in a good market? Is there a market for your book? Do people like your book? What clicks with them? What doesn't click with them? You can't discover that in a vacuum, right? You have to get your product into lean startup. You have to get your thing out in front of people and iterate. In terms of testing a market, you can test the market for a book before you've even written a word, right? Put up an attractive landing page, see if people sign up. Run a Kickstarter in Eric's case, right? Like, yeah, there's a number of really direct parallels.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is a book is a product that's a particular segment in the market and intended to generate revenue. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's, I mean, it's a product, and it is, but it's more than that. If you're a startup, so I'm a startup founder, I'm a book author, and the most successful books I've written have been the ones that I felt least producty about, like the ones where I felt passionate about, like, I would write this even if I wasn't going to earn anything from it. This is something important, right? Like, I have to write this now because if I don't, like, because this book is going, like my first book, Flexible Rails, like, I had the idea for months. I sat there, did nothing, and then I saw one blog post by someone. I'm like, oh my God, someone else has figured it out too. And it's like, okay, right? And I got him, Stuart Eccles, the guy who wrote the blog post, to write the forward for my book, because it's like, you have this idea that you see the world in a certain way as a startup founder or as a book author, like technically say a technical book author, or you have some idea and it's just like this idea is in your this burning, and it's like, well, you now have this perspective, right? And just like same startup founders, right? Startup founders have their reality distortion fields and everything, right? Because for them, they can visualize where the world's going, and well, it's almost inevitable that it's going to happen, right? And so you just have to get there. And so, yeah.
All right, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of this, Peter. Can you describe to us in as much detail as you can how the lean startup methodology is applied to publishing?
Sure. So in terms of lean startup, it's all about build, measure, learn. Like, and you think about, what do you want to learn? How do you measure it? What should you build? And so for publishing, it should kind of be the same thing in terms of, if you think about in general, what can you learn if you're just writing as an author, just iterating for the benefit of a development editor for months and months and months? The ability to learn anything and measure anything is greatly reduced, because what you're learning and measuring is how much does your development editor like what you're writing. And so for publishing and lean publishing and how we apply lean startup to publishing, what we say is what you want to do is be able to do the build, measure, learn lean startup process in public with readers with a produced product. And so what that means is, at a high level, if you want to measure, is there even a market, or can I reach that market? You could, without even writing anything, if you wanted to, you could, go on Leanpub or Kickstarter or anything, create a landing page for a book that you're going to write, explain what you want to do, and then see if anyone will fund it. I mean, that's literally the Kickstarter model is, hey, I want to build this thing, pay me up front, right? And some people have had amazing success with that when they wanted to produce print books, for example, that have had production costs. The Kickstarter approach of like, hey, I need to raise all this money because I want to hire an artist and yada, yada, right? Works really well. Now, if you're going to write a technical book, and most of Leanpub is technical books, the only real cost is time. And so measuring, we've thought about, should you pre-purchasing, for example, isn't something we've gone down because it wouldn't be authentic. And so how you apply the lean startup approach to publishing on, for example, Leanpub, is create a landing page for the book. People can register interest, sign up, say what they pay, even so you get an idea roughly of your total addressable market, or what portion of it you can reach, what type of product they see this as, is this a premium product or is it a cheap product? Then start writing. And when you're, for us, what we say is you should ship your first version of the book, for your MVP, when you're kind of embarrassed by it still. And for me, the approach I recommend is you ship when you think you could save, if you're writing a technical book, say, when you could save an expert 1 or 2 hours of time, or even an intermediate person 1 or 2 hours of time. That's typically a 1 to 3 chapter book would do that. And so, for example, so you've started writing on Leanpub, you write in plain text, click a button, book exists. If your 1 to 3 chapters of book would be kind of interesting to someone who knows what they're doing in the field, then to a novice, wow, they've saved probably at least 10 hours, right? Because just do the math between expert people versus people who aren't experts. And then iterate in public, right? Build, measure, learn. Do all the lean startup process of publish early, publish often is our motto, right? Keep releasing, iterating, getting feedback from readers, find out what works, what doesn't, produce new versions. This process can go as long as you need it to. So typically, we expect that people, when they use Leanpub, for example, iterate in public for months. One author wrote this really great blog post a few years ago called 25K in book sales and I'm almost ready to publish. And he iterated in public on Leanpub for almost 2 years. And he was writing a book about Ansible and Jeff Geerling. And he iterated in public, he built this community. And what you do is you build a community of readers around your book, people who are interested in your book, who are learning from it, who are asking you questions, who people find typos, people are confused, whatever. And that type of approach is really what we're all about, is helping authors iterate in public with feedback from their early adopter customers, making this product, which is really good. It's something that would go to early majority and then cross the chasm if you're really lucky to, the Jeffrey Moore curve, right? That's the process. If
I can jump in. So when an author is iterating like this with their first adopter readers,
mm-hmm.
What sorts of metrics have you seen that they're measuring? What's the measure part of this?
So sales, obviously, we authors care about sort of number of readers, and also people care about money because money's great. But besides that, it's engagement in terms of people submit questions. Some authors have set up their own private forums, or mailing lists. But lots of people just get like people engaging with them on social media, Twitter, email. So you basically, as an author, you can tell when you're publishing in progress, is this connecting with people or not?
Mm-hmm.
And like just first from just the sales, but two from the qualitatively from the type of engagement from your reader.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's really important, like, because you provide ways, whatever, and we don't force, for example, on Leanpub, we just recently rolled out a thing, Discourse, which is an open source forum thing. So you can do anything from like use a forum on Leanpub to you can have your own mailing list, Twitter, whatever. But the amount of engagement you get from your readers is really going to be correlated with, how successful your book is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about book MVP. And
Sure.
the topic minimum viable product in general has been discussed a lot. Let's talk about what a book MVP is. And if you've seen different types of MVPs, have you seen authors, and you give an example of authors writing, 1, 2, or 3 chapters, but have you seen other kinds of MVPs? I mean, we know kind of the common definition of a product MVP is that version of a product that gets you the most validated learnings with the least effort. How does that translate to book writing?
So one way to think about it is a blog is kind of a book MVP. Like Eric, for example, like just taking the canonical example, Eric wrote Startup Lessons Learned blog, and he did it when he initially launched it, he did it anonymously so that he could see does the writing resonate with people before anyone knows who he is, So he, measured how well his blog resonated with people and was a lot more disciplined, I think, about what he did with that than most people, including myself, would be, right? And so the question of, is what you're writing going to click with people, is something that you can really straightforwardly measure if you publish, your writing. And if you think about, with the origin of Leanpub, when we initially launched, we were sort of in the blog to book space. Like, since we had this plain text publishing workflow, we thought of it as, well, you could write a blog, see if you get your readers, grow your reader base, then click a button, import your blog, and then click another button, produce book. And so the sort of blog to book workflow is kind of, if you want to think about book MVPs, you could look at a blog as being an MVP of a book. And many bloggers, have become successful authors, and many bloggers are constantly reached out to by publishers, because if you can, the publisher can tell, oh, this person can write well, or, oh, this person can write well and attract an audience, right? And so in many ways, I think a blog is like the perfect book MVP. Now, one thing specifically around that is, what you don't want to think of it as is, well, I'll just take my blog and import it and click a button and that'll be it, and I won't do anything. Because then we started Leanpub, and we had a lot of blog to book type stuff happening, and to go from an MVP of a book to like a real successful book requires like effort and love and passion by the author, not by like someone you outsourced it to, or not just by like doing nothing at all, right? So we at one point a number of years ago, there was one startup that was in this space that said, oh, we're launching in the blog to book space. We're going to have a bunch of essentially English majors come in and take popular bloggers' works and edit it for them and produce these business books. And Leanpub's our main competitor. And we're like, wow, cool. We're competing with an Andreessen Horowitz company, and we're this bootstrap Canadians. We're this bootstrap Canadians, and they're all big, and they've got all this backing and all that. But we've already moved on from that. Like, for us, like, we realized that a blog just spewed as a book, like a blog barf is what we were calling them, doesn't work. And what you need to do is take a blog and actually make a book out of it. And that requires like, actual struggle and effort, right? And so going from the book MVP, which could either be a few chapters of a technical book, or a blog, or if you build a mailing list and you have people subscribing to your mailing list, that's essentially a blog in mailing list form. But that type of writing turns into a book nicely.
Mm-hmm.
I know, for example, like other examples that aren't related to us, someone wrote a Reddit comment once that turned into, they got a screenplay deal from a Reddit comment about, like, I think it was like imagine like, I think like a US military people time traveling into ancient Rome, and like, imagine like Navy SEALs versus the Roman Empire or something. I don't know. Like, so you can, what can be an MVP of something that ends up larger can start really, really small, but there has to be this promise there.
Got it. How about one or two success stories that really highlight, how authors have used this effectively and succeeded and stood out in their market?
Mm-hmm. So I always talk about Jeff Geerling with his great like 25K in book sales and now I'm almost ready to publish post. We have a page at leanpub.com, testimonials, where a number of authors have said nice things about us. Two examples. One is Luc Baudouin. He wrote a book called Cognitive Productivity, and talking about how lean publishing and lean startup type approaches can be used for scholarly and academic work, and talk about establishing relationships with people who can provide invaluable feedback on their work, and about developing knowledge in the form of an evolving book on facilitating collaboration. And specifically, he was excited about the idea that in academic places, like the idea of the GitHub-based workflows, right, around collaboration. Like as software developers, we have the best tools for collaboration, right? And then when you look at what authors have, it's terrible. It's like track changes in Word and you send documents back and forth with an editor, right? And so one of the success stories for us in Luke's case, and in a number of other authors, is authors who have been able to collaborate better with fellow authors using these lightweight text-based workflows, right? Because Leanpub, for example, supports Dropbox and GitHub and Bitbucket. So any platform that lets you collaborate based on plain text lets you have workflows based on plain text. And those workflows can include things like pull requests and, all of the sort of high-powered stuff software developers can do, is now becoming accessible for writers. And, that's just incredible. Another example of high-powered, a really amazing example of success stories is so in the data science space. So there were a number of professors at a prominent American university who made one of the most popular MOOCs ever. And they actually wrote an academic paper called The Democratization of Data Science Education, talking about how they used various approaches and, lean startup approaches, and with Leanpub and other platforms like Coursera. And I have this really great quote from them. The high cost of textbooks with frequent edition updates is one of the biggest justifiable complaints from students. From the beginning, we'd released all course material under an open source license on GitHub. However, we needed a mechanism for releasing affordable books and course notes. We used the Leanpub platform, which offered variable pricing model with no minimum payment required. And textbooks from several of our courses, sold hundreds of thousands of free and paid copies on Leanpub. But the really important thing for them was the ability to make books from their course notes, like from the same source documents. Like if you're producing all these courses, for a MOOC platform, and then you're producing books, you have to keeping everything in sync. If you're producing books the traditional way, and if you're producing courses, however the course platform was doing, would just be an absolute nightmare, right? And so having this streamlined plain text-based workflow is a game changer, really is.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an example of an author who wrote a book the traditional way and it didn't do really well, and then he did it the lean publishing way and succeeded?
Sure. Okay, so when I talk about failure, I like to talk about myself, because then that way no one can be offended. So I've spectacularly failed in the traditional publishing way. My second book I wrote my first book actually in the lean publishing way. Before Leanpub existed, I started writing. But I'll get back to how I've written subsequent books that have done nicely for me in publishing as well. But I'll start with the second book. So after the success of my first book, I thought, okay, great. Now I've done it this sort of like my own made up way, and now I'm going to do things the normal way. And so worked with a publisher, worked with a development editor, did the outline for the book, started building it. The process took longer than we expected because we were figuring out a format for the book, and then partway through, I got enough feedback that I had to change some stuff. And so the book was about Flex, and I thought I was writing a book about Flex 3, which is Flex was a way of making business apps on the Flash platform, essentially. And so I was writing a book about Flex for 3. It was the traditional way. It was taking too long. So I thought, okay, well, I'll pivot. I'll make this a book about Flex 4. Flex 4 is in beta now, right? So instead of having the last Flex 3 book, I'll have the first Flex 4 book, and it's an introductory book. And so introductory books are most popular when they're released right with a new thing, right? So far I'm making sense, right? So I worked on my Flex 4 book. It was going to be this big success, and got it done. I actually I liked it. I thought it was a funny book, and it had cartoons in it and stuff. And I published when Flex 4 was in its second, after it had done its second beta, right? So Adobe doesn't move super fast, right? So they did Flex 4, they shipped a beta, they shipped another beta. I'd been tracking it the whole time. I'd already had my book, I'd morphed it into a Flex 4 book, and then we published it. So the book was obsolete before the ink was dry. A week after the print books were produced, they made a new version of Flex 4 beta, which changed the namespace. It's a minor little detail. Broke every single code example in my entire book. So we just produced all the print books, ready to go, it's done, shipped it, yay! And then the new version came out, my entire book's dead. Nothing would work for anyone. So, well, make some updates, write a blog post, and say, please download these examples instead, right?
And so how would Lean have...
How would it have helped? Yeah. So one thing is, since you wouldn't want to, in terms of what you would have done is been iterating in public on the thing, not just until the moment where you said, okay, now we're locking this in stone, let's produce a print book. You'd be iterating in public through the release of the final product. For example, with Leanpub books, if you want to, you can decide never to be done because it's an ebook. If something changes, you can make an update, right? So the book, you'd never have broken code examples, right? So in terms of with Lean, how would it have helped? One is I would have started earlier, published more in progress versions earlier, built a community around my book the way I had done with my first one. And then when Flex, when the betas were being released, I would have updated the code examples. When they made the namespace change to break everything, I just would have updated the examples and clicked the button, and everything would have worked again. And I would have had the first book about Flex 4, and it would have already had a community around it, and possibly gotten traction instead of just being this thing that didn't work. And and now, of course, eventually it would have failed too because the whole Flash platform got killed. Mm-hmm. But some things in life you can't control.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of, so ironically, as I said, that was my second book, and that was a massive failure, and it was. My first book actually was a big success, and I created it before Leanpub. So what I did was, I was working as a software developer, and I was writing Flex code. And on the back end, we were dealing with this Java stuff, and it was good and all that, but it was really enterprisey. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if Flex, and this is 2006, 2007. Flex back then was basically as good as things like React or Angular are now in terms of from a developer perspective, what you can do. And so I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if you could have Flex on the front and Rails on the back? And so I was like, well, this is mind-blown, life-changing thing. So I started writing about that. And Leanpub obviously didn't exist. I was a developer working for a Silicon Valley startup. And so I thought, well, okay, no, there's no way I'm even going to talk to publishers about this. This is like an out there, wacky, crazy idea. I'm just going to produce it myself. How can I self-publish? Well, I went on Lulu. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll make a book on Lulu. Lulu's for print books. How am I going to do an ebook? Well, like Lulu also lets you sell PDFs. Okay, cool. So I'll sell a PDF on Lulu. It's an in-progress PDF. Problem, Lulu doesn't give you email addresses of the customers, and you have no way of communicating with them. How on earth can I sell a in-progress book if I don't know who bought my book and I can't send them any messages? So what I did was, when you bought the book, you could get a thank you note. And so I'm like, thank you for buying my book. It's in progress. If you want updates, go to this Google group and sign up. Or you can go to flexiblerels.com/rumpelstiltskin/security-through-obscurity.html. Go there, and anyone who goes there will have, like, this is where I'm going to post the updated books forever. And so it was literally like a hidden URL on the internet where I posted updates, and a Google group where people could download updates. And I was just nobody living in Canada, writing this book in my spare time. And I had 1,000 people all over the world who like bought my book, who were using it, doing consulting, who were building businesses based on the idea. And like literally nothing was in my favor, right? I had no platform. I didn't have like any social media. It's just, I had this one idea, I got it out there, it got some traction, spread. I went to the first, to RailsConf. I didn't even get a talk at RailsConf. My RailsConf talk was rejected. So what did I do? Well, in the evenings, there were these birds of a feather sessions. And so I did a talk there, and it was me, and I think it was like the other birds of a feather sessions. I think there was like Minnesotans on Rails. And so it was like me or like people from Minnesota who like Ruby on Rails. So I had like 300 people in this auditorium all listening to my talk, and I got to, people from Adobe were even there. They said nice things. They said, like it kicked off, kicked off the next level of it. Right. I had this, and so I had this, by that point I already had hundreds of readers, had this community, right? And I did all that publishing in progress using lean startup type approaches that I just, as a software developer, like, with background with open source, you do things that way, right? And so, and it turning down 2 publishers before I finally did a publishing deal, because if you can build a real community yourself and iterate and connect with your customers, like that's ideal, right? So then at the end of the day, Leanpub was literally just taking all of my experiences of doing that and codifying it into a product.
Yeah, great story. Thanks for that, Peter.
Thank you.
Now, what about pitfalls? Like, have you seen maybe an author who was like bought into this approach and dived right in and tried it, but made mistakes in
Sure.
applying the principles, the approach to writing a book?
Again, so in terms of specific failures, I love my specific failures. So I'll pick one example from me, and then I'll pick some general examples. So I, about 6 months ago, sort of discovered intermittent fasting. And I was like 240 pounds and out of shape. And I'm like, intermittent fasting is this great thing. I read this article in The Guardian about the CEO, like the former CEO of Evernote, and read some other stuff and thought, okay, this is amazing. So I figured out something, and I ended up like losing like 40 pounds, and I thought to write about it. So I started just basically eating 10 meals in a week. And so I started writing a book on Leanpub called The 10 Meal Week, and like 6 dinners, 4 lunches. And so I started writing it, and so it's a great market, like, fitness diet books, right? Like that's an enormous market. And I published in progress, but the mistake I made was I just didn't have the, sometimes like when I start something, I have a certain level of commitment to it, but I don't have the commitment of I'm actually willing to finish this and do what it takes to make this a success. And that's generalized. because like the amount, and I've written books that have done well and I've written books that haven't, but the books that do well are hundreds of hours of work, or for me, Flexible Rails was 1,000 hours of work. And so I was really excited about the fact that intermittent fasting had really helped me from a health perspective. I wasn't, and so I wanted to write down what I wanted to sort of scratch my itch and just explain what I'd done. But I did that in like 35 pages. And after I'd written those 35 pages, I was happy with myself that I'd explained it and just written essentially a really long blog post. But I realized I wasn't willing to try to make it a successful book at this moment. I'm way too busy running Leanpub. I have, all of these things I need to do. What I don't need to try to do is become like a diet book guru. That's not something that's in scope for my life, right? I have no formal training in the area. I don't want to like tell someone, hey, eat 6 dinners and 4 lunches, and then I go develop anorexia. I mean, that would be horrible, right? Like, the idea of, just launch something, iterate. I mean, I'm a huge believer in that, but you also have to think through, like, are you committed, like visualizing what is involved in making a thing? Are you committed to actually finishing it? And are you committed to like doing some work to market it? Because nothing markets themselves, right? Nothing markets itself. And, deep down, I probably knew I wasn't committed to doing that, but I wanted to, so I did it anyway, and then just sort of, there you go. So that's a sort of, but the nice thing, so again, that's a failure. The nice thing for me about this is it's a fast failure. Like, it's not like you put in 6 months or a year of work in stealth and then you make a thing and it's bad. It's like, write 30 pages, click the button, realize, oh, yeah, I'm kind of done. I don't really want to do it anymore. And it's not taking off. Right. So the market's not pulling this out of me. No one really needs to hear me talking about eating 10 meals in a week. I can kind of stop. Now, in terms of other people and more general, we've seen a situation where people use Leanpub, but they use Leanpub as though it's not a thing for using the lean startup, lean publishing approach, but instead just a really easy publishing platform, and writing a full book or a number of books and publishing them as, hey, we're done, here you go. And just hoping that you'll magically get traction. And that mistake of, hey, taking a finished thing and hoping you can build a community around it because you use a platform that's for building communities around books, that doesn't work either. What I've seen this from a number of authors is you have way more engagement from your readers and way more of a community when your book is less done and worse. And I had this in my own personal example before Leanpub even existed with Flexible Rails. The comments I got when a book was 100, 150, 200 pages and bad were way better than when it was like a 500-page thing that was actually pretty good. Like, at that point, people are like, well, that's the author. I have, like, they've done this really good thing. Yeah, there's a typo, whatever, or like, I'm not going to make, but when you're doing something and there's promise, but there's real problems, but there's parts that are really good, that's when people can really connect with the thing. And so, and that's just like with startups, right? Like Eric's point about startups and Steve Blank before him, talking about the early customers want a worse product, right? It's the same for books. And so the one mistake is not shipping that bad product early enough. So.
Excellent. Now I'd like to close with a question around advice. So typically when I'm advising or coaching a regular product team, I always start them with customer discovery and forming at least a credible hypothesis of a problem statement that's informed by data and customer empathy versus their own opinions. What's the equivalent for that in lean publishing? What advice would you give maybe somebody who is thinking or planning on starting to write a book? Where should they start? What should they be thinking about?
So,
as a first step.
So the first step, I think, would be to either start writing a blog if they aren't, or to start like. So first of all, some advice would be things not to do. So don't worry that you're not an expert. Lots of people who've written successful books on Leanpub aren't like the world experts in their field. I mean, some people are. Like the guy who wrote one of our best Laravel books, made Laravel, right? But you don't have to be that. You can write a good book, a great book, even if you're not an expert. So you don't have to worry about. So one piece of advice would be, don't worry if you're not like the complete expert on the subject. So what you have to worry about is, do you have something you want to share that you think will benefit a lot of people? Are you willing to put in the time, right? Because it takes time. Blogging or just writing, signing up and writing on Leanpub, or blogging or just writing over a sustained amount of time is something that isn't for everyone. But if you'll find out, is it something that is for you, right? So piece of advice would be start. And also another piece of advice would be publish sooner. Like if you're wondering, should I publish or not? Chances are you already should have published. Once the amount of commitment you get, once you actually have readers, cannot be overstated. Like for me with my first book, Flexible Rails, I remember I was sitting in my basement and I had 5 readers. I'm like, well, I guess I have to finish this now. It'd be really embarrassing if I'd taken $20 from these 5 people with no way of giving them a refund. And I just, made a fool of myself, right? Like start, click the publish button, get readers, right? It's really as simple as that. Like there's other stuff like, total addressable market, right? Like, Mark Andreessen's whole, like, is a product market fit, like what's the most important thing? And it is market. Like, for example, if you're writing about some really obscure academic area, you will not sell tons and tons and tons of copies. But now the flip side though is with the internet, lots of things that seem obscure or seem niche aren't. So like basically many of the books that do really, really well on Leanpub would be books that would have been rejected by publishers 5 or 10 years ago. Because they'd be about something too niche, like this JavaScript build system, or this JavaScript framework, or that JavaScript framework. Ironically for us at Leanpub, one of the things that's helped us succeed is the complete balkanization of tech, right? Like there's, 10, 15 years ago, there was like 3 or 4 dominant platforms in a given area. Now there's just hundreds of JavaScript frameworks alone, right? And so by the time a major publisher had figured out, oh, React is a thing and we should have a book, there were already like 3 or 4 on Leanpub, right? With real grassroots support, and they're really good. So what you think, so niche, like doing the best thing in a niche. So Jeff Geerling's example, Ansible for DevOps. Like Ansible for DevOps? Of course. Now, of course, there should be a book called that, right? 5 years ago, maybe, right? Like, so niche, like if basically write about one thing. Don't try to write don't try to do like write about one thing and then also write all the filler stuff that you think has to be in the book. That's a terrible idea. So like one of the reasons that you see when you have a book and it's 500 pages and there's like the 60 or 80 pages that are good and then the 4 or 20 pages that you kind of tell the author didn't want to write and really kind of shouldn't be there because they don't really add anything. Those are there for a few reasons. One, the publisher is convinced like, well, we won't sell the book unless it's like also got all this generic introductory stuff, right? And 2, we need to make the book physically larger so it can like fit on the shelf, right? Like it take up space so that you can read write the book that you should write. If it's an 80-page book, write an 80-page book. If it's a 300-page book, write a 300-page book, right? Like put the things in it that you think should be in it. But obviously now the thing is, you don't do this in a vacuum. You do it, you publish and iterate with feedback from your readers. And so if readers are asking you about stuff all the time, you'll pretty much learn pretty fast what should get in there. And so write the book you want to write, publish sooner than you think you should, iterate in public, use lightweight tools, many iterations.
I think what's really exciting about this is, setting aside the lower barriers technically to publish, is the what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of aspiring authors who, because the bottom line of what you just said is just get started, just start.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of aspiring authors who the hardest part is getting started, because it seems like such an insurmountable thing to write a book.
Yeah.
But with the concept of like setting everything aside and just saying the concept of a book MVP is get out a couple of chapters that you think are really valuable, and get the initial following from the early adopters, get their feedback, and then continue, iterate and build on that. And to me, that's really exciting, because that opens the door to a lot of people who are afraid of afraid of getting started, or they think it's, I got to sit down and write 12 chapters of this book. So there's I guess, psychological barrier. That was the word I was looking for. Okay, so I'm going to say that again.
No. Well, you said that. That was really good, because the point is, it is a psychological barrier, but it's this thing that you can't. It's hard to put your finger on. It's like, what's writer's block, right? Like writer's block is like, it's mostly internal, and it's mostly around uncertainty around, can I do this? Will people care? Will it be any good? What will the finished thing look like? Books, and especially with books, like if you're an author or you want to be an author, chances are you have a good regard for books, right? And so there's this mystique, and you're like, well, am I this person who could be an author, right? I'm like, your first book, it's like, oh, now I'm an author, right? Like, and you expect it to be like, you have to conquer a lot of internal demons before you can actually like ship something, right? And it's all just like most of it's fear, I think. Like, will anybody care, right? Will people think, what if I sell no copies? What if I sell a bunch and people hate it, right? Those are both bad. Like all these different fears you have, but the act of clicking the publish button and then, it's published. Oh, okay. Oh, actually, and then if you didn't do anything else, no one noticed. Oh, okay, it's actually not, it's okay. I clicked the publish, I've got it. Now it's like, well, do you want people to notice? Okay, so start reaching out to people, and build a community, right? It's like, no, it's not this big, horrible, scary thing. And then you get readers, and then all of a sudden, then there's this pressure to make your book better. And that's really good, because then you make your book better, and then you have more happy readers. Like, you can build these loops, right? And so, yeah, it's really the idea of taking lean startup approaches, right? Of shipping an MVP, of actually engaging with your customers, right? Making a better book, it enables you to do something you couldn't have done. Like, if you think when you're done the book and it's over and you've made a print book out of it and whatever, and you look back and you think, okay, well, that's all the stuff I had to do to make that. The you that started the book might not have thought that you could have finished it and done all that, right? It's just like, if you ask any like startup person years later, it's like, well, given you everything you did, would you at the time have known you could have done all that? Like, usually the answer would be no, right? But like, people can grow and learn and do all kinds of stuff that surprises them, right?
I think, if we were to state a problem that the lean startup solves with publishing, I think this is a core part of that problem for authors. And kind of a corollary to that, you mentioned at the very beginning, and I think a very legitimate concern that we should acknowledge from authors who fear getting their ideas out too soon, or fear of them being stolen or copied. What do you say to them to conquer that fear?
So a few things. It happens. It does happen. It's not an illegitimate fear. I've had my ideas copied, right? And so what? Right? Like, if it's just like with startups. If your idea can be copied by some fast follower and done way better, right? And then you lose, well then, yeah, you sucks for you, but like, you if the only thing that's going to help you is the fact that you had this one idea in some nucleus form slightly earlier than the 10 other people or 100 other people in the world that probably also have the idea, that aren't copying you. And then when you publish the first time, 1,000 people see it. Now you have 1,100 people who have the same idea, right? If the only thing that helps you is your initial idea, and you're not going to execute better, and you're not going to like build, a community around your work, well, okay. I mean, so who cares, right? Like, it's not about people copying your idea or piracy. What if people just copy my book? Like Leanpub has no DRM. What if people copy my stuff? The only real fear is obscurity, is that nobody cares. Is that the bigger fear than what if people steal an idea is what if nobody wants to steal your idea, right? That's the way worse thing, right? Like I've literally had one thing I've written turn into a published book with one word different. Like, and it's like, well, it's fine. It's a great idea. Great ideas are going to be had by a number of people, right? Like people who have like every good idea that I've had has also been had by other people in some variant form. We see this all the time. Every now and again, someone says, hey, I just thought of doing this thing, and then I saw Leanpub, and you guys have done exactly what I was going to do. And it's like, yeah, I know. It's like, great, and I'm sorry. And like, like if you have an idea, chances are, A, you're not the only person with the idea. So it's not your idea. It's just you happen to be one of the lucky people who have the idea, right? And now the great thing about publishing, and especially revision control, if you really are concerned about people stealing your idea, write your book in public, put it on GitHub, and commit early and often. And then if you're like really want to be like, haha, I prove I had the idea first, you can point at a commit history. Be like, see, in April 2018, I did a commit, and these were my words, and they were there. And then a year later, this other thing came out, and my words were there first. Nobody cares, right? So, but like, write, publish. I mean, on Leanpub, you don't have to use Git. On Leanpub, we have versions. You can download every version you've ever published. We automatically make them, blah, blah, blah. But like, the point is, if you just have an idea and you don't publish, right? And so you work really hard on a book for 2 or 3 years, you didn't publish anything. And then you go publish, but the day before, you see in the bookstore or like on the internet, people are raving about some in progress, incomplete book with something really similar to your idea in it. And you're like, oh no, right? Like it's like, for example, in math, like, was it 2 or 3 people to figure out calculus at similar times? Or like when people are looking for planets, people like, you know what I mean? Like there's a number of examples of people in independent places discovering things at similar times, but one person publishes sooner than the other, and so they get the credit, and the other person, had it in rough notes, but nobody cares about that. Like, if you have an idea and it's good, publish it. If it's really good, then make sure you really publish it early, because chances are other people have it too. Publish early and iterate, right? The internet has a pretty good memory. So if you get your idea out there when it's really rough and bad, and iterate and build a community, if other people steal your idea, well, they'll be the derivative ones. Or if other people are iterating, if other people started earlier than you and be going in stealth, well, they'll be really sour when your thing comes out. So publish.
Yeah, and like you said, it's all in the execution of the idea. I mean, companies do this all the time. They copy each other and fail.
Yeah.
And companies put out their ideas early with public landing pages because they trust in their ability to be the best at execution. Well, on that note, Peter, I want to thank you very, very much for your time, your insights, sharing your experiences, and helping us think about how to apply the Lean Startup in the world of publishing. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, both of you.
Thanks.
Thanks.